Coming up, those new look Brooklyn Nets are ready to take that home stretch down the back half of the season. We go ahead and bring in Matt Brooks from Nets Daily to talk a little film. How high can the ceiling be for Mikal Bridges? Let's dive in next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends. It's the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. I'm Adam Armbrecht, and that over there, as you should well know, is Matt Brooks from Nets Daily, also from the Clear Out podcast, breaking down not only the Brooklyn Nets, but also NBA tape at large, because there's more than just Brooklyn Nets narratives. But today, Matt, we're going to dive in on the new look roster here, Mikal Bridges specifically, and what we think he can be over the remainder of this season and beyond. How are you, sir? Came out of the trade deadline unscathed?
I did. I'm in Nets colors today, as in I'm wearing a black hoodie, and I'm looking right now, and my skin is so pale. I need to go outside, so I kind of got the white and black look going on here. I'm definitely repping the Nets well today.
I recently got a new beautiful USB camera. I turned it on, plugged in. I was like, "Oh, this is so crisp," and then sat down and went, God, is the tone off on this thing? It seems a little off. My girlfriend said, she goes, "No, that's you. That's the walking around. That's the walking around color you've got on your face." People asking, "Are you okay? Are you healthy?"
I look a little ghostly. Winter always does me dirty, and it has been no exception this year. So excited for spring. I need to get just any amount of bronze on this, because I'm ghostly. I look ill right now.
That's it. Listen, and guess what? With what's going on with the Brooklyn Nets, maybe we all look a little bit ill. We come out of it, though. Come out of the deadline. Obviously, we know the multiple trades. We don't need to rehash any of that stuff here. We are doing this live on a Friday afternoon over on YouTube. If you're in the chat, just like our post games, throw up some questions if you want. If I see some good ones, I'll star them. Some time on the back end. We'll have a little bit of fun with everybody. But the most important, really, conversation here is what is this team? They got 24 games left. They have the playoffs. Like, I think that's an achievable goal and something where we could at least have some excitement around them giving some teams some trouble in the early rounds. But Mikal Bridges was the key piece in this Phoenix Sun trade. By all reports, you go back to the previous ownership group. Maybe this is what held up the trade in the offseason for Kevin Durant when he made the initial request. They didn't want to give up Mikal Bridges. New ownership comes in. You want to make the splash. You give up that piece. What have you seen in watching Mikal Bridges, really specifically, the 45-point career game that he had just before the All-Star break? That's awesome. I don't expect that to be the norm. But where do you see his game expanding in a way that you just weren't going to get that same sample size when you're playing behind Chris Paul, behind Booker, Ayton? We know we saw a little more of it in Phoenix this year, but you're hoping that there's another level that he can go to.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen him evolve his game. I'm working on a big video right now that should hopefully be out tomorrow if there's no hiccups. So one of the things I kind of talked about was his evolution as a player. He came in as this 3-and-D guy, has evolved that over the years. Posting up was one of the first things I feel like he really started working with. Phoenix started using that as a form of offense for him. This year, you've seen him start to get a little more creative with, if they actually run a pick and roll for him. He can create for himself. He can get to the mid-range area. And he's continued to do that in Brooklyn. They've been pretty aggressive about giving him pick and roll reps. And we've seen kind of what he can do. He's very, 7'1" wingspan. His very unique looking shot, I think, is probably a good way to put it. He has these long arms, and he holds the ball like well above his head. I'm like acting this out on the stream right now, but
on YouTube.
Yeah. Thank God. I'm sure the viewers are really pleased with that one. My beautiful acting out here. But no, the way he positions the ball is he's holding it way over his head, versus Durant is somebody who's got to he picks up from here and he kind of gets it to like maybe about his forehead level. Bridges is way above his head, and it makes it really hard to block his shot. And it's weird, like watching him. He's not the same as Durant in that I think Durant has a lot more mobility with his handle and just where he can get to on the floor. And he's just, he's arguably one of the 3 greatest scorers ever. But Bridges has certain similarities in terms of it's really hard to block his shot. He's pretty proficient from the mid-range. If you give him a pick and roll, he's going to get to his spots. He's got, a couple basic moves, crossovers, or maybe throwing a hesitation dribble. And he's a guy that plays off ball really, really well. So those are all things that I think have been really impressive. And I get it. Like, I've seen the star thing thrown out quite a bit for him. I would not be shocked if he's an all-star at all. I mean, just watching him in these first 3 games, sure, you take the 45-point game and you could throw that out and say, hey, maybe that was an anomaly. But even in the games, the game against Philly, you just see the flashes and what he's able to do and how much he's added to his game. And he's become like a really, really good mid-range shooter.
Do you think that skill set, the evolution of some of his offensive game, it's actually 2 parts? Because Doug and I talked about this, about sometimes a guy, he's 26. It's not like he's a young player in the league, maybe just about to hit the cusp of his prime. But sometimes when you are a sub player on a roster, it does behoove you to develop some of those other areas of your game. So then when you get the opportunity, you're that much better prepared to then just add in some of the scoring, add in some of the offensive playmaking that you want to see. Can he continue to play that way on the roster the Brooklyn Nets have constructed? Because we always talk about, when you're playing with Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, guess what? The job becomes a lot easier. He doesn't have that same supporting cast, not the production at 45 points, but can he consistently be that offensive playmaker, especially against some of the harder teams?
Yeah, I mean, I think like a good comp, not like in terms of play style, but just in terms of watching trajectory, is somebody like Pascal Siakam, who's really just like kind of over the years has grown, has improved his game. He showed flashes as like a real contributor on the team with Kawhi that ended up winning the finals. I believe it was the next year that he was an all-star. Over the years, he had a down year after that. Was pretty good last year. And then this year he comes in and it's like, oh, he's got this like refined mid-range game. He's improved in so many different facets. He's 29 or 28 maybe. And he's taking like another leap in a way. And I think Bridges is a guy like that where, I can see him continuing to take leaps. Also, Bridges is a guy that really has been like a supporting piece. He's at best been, maybe a third option.
Right.
On some of these Suns teams, maybe 4th behind Ayton. And this year was the first year we really got to see like, okay, what does it look like when Bridges has the ball in his hands a little bit more? And he's just proven to be, efficient in pretty much all areas. You look at his shooting stats, you can go to NBA.com and look that up. He's pretty much efficient from every single area of the floor. He's efficient no matter how many dribbles he takes, which I think is really interesting. Some guys look really good with 1 to 2 dribbles. He's somebody, he can dribble the ball 7 times and still be efficient. So those are all signs to me that you're looking at a guy that's a star level player. What caliber of star? I don't know. I don't think he's going to get to like a top 10 player, but this is a guy who could feasibly be, especially because of how good he is defensively, a second best player on a championship team. I think that's within the realm of possibilities for sure.
Yeah, it's not, the idea of consistency in his performance in his game, right? Like you're not going to be a guy that takes over in the way superstars take over. But if you can set reasonable expectations on a night in, night out basis, and that does feel in a lot of ways what the Brooklyn Nets are going to try to accomplish here. It's, hey, between our starting rotation and the guys that are coming in off the bench, we need just consistency and reliability, not in the vein of behind superstars, we need you to serve your role. It's actually all around games that matter most here. And if we think about, so Jacque Vuaghn had come out and said, coming out of the break, we're going 10-man rotation, and then we're going to refine it down to 9 for the playoff push. So the premise is they are preparing for the playoffs. They're obviously going to try to keep their head above water here when it comes to the standings. I think they're in a pretty good position to not even fall down into the 9th to the 10th seed. There's very interesting games coming up starting on Friday night. 3 of the next 4 games will be against teams that are just behind them in the standings in the Eastern Conference. But if you look at and you can look at the minutes as things have gone on here, even though it was over these first 4 games. Dinwiddie, Bridges, Johnson, Finney-Smith, Claxton. When you get into this 10, and we heard Vaughn say too, Curry is going to be a part of this. And we had our frustrations coming out of the deadline saying expiring contract, 30, 31 years old. Why is he on this team? I'm having a hard time figuring out what the expectations are here based on what they're going to do. Because after the starting 5, it's easy to say that Cam Thomas is going to have his role. Royce O'Neal used in closing lineups here since the trades went down, so you expect that as well. Day'Ron Sharpe, you assume, gets minutes because they don't have anybody else to back up Claxton in that way. And then we get into the Ben Simmons conversation. But my mind splits here because if you're preparing for the playoffs, I don't know if either one of Day'Ron Sharpe or Ben Simmons is the guy that should be getting minutes here. Like, does that track for you? Because Day'Ron's just young, still developing, and Ben Simmons hasn't given any indication that he's going to be anything worthwhile. Like, you could play him now for the next 24 games and then say, we're sitting you down for the playoffs. So I can't determine which thing the Nets are truly trying to accomplish: developing guys, figuring out guys, and actually having a rotation that makes the most sense for them.
I would legitimately sit Ben Simmons with a fake injury. Like, I'm at that point with this where I'm like, I don't know how this is beneficial for either side. Because I do think, like, if there is physical hindrance with his back, which I could totally see, what is either side getting out of this? Like, it's not helping the Nets to to put a spotlight on him. Like, it's not like they're going to be like, all right, we're going to come to the offseason and like trade this guy. Like, you're going to have to give up value to move him. And at this point, it's like you might as well just roll it over to next year and just hope for the best. At least it'll be another year of his contract kind of out of the way. If he doesn't improve, I would legitimately think about doing that. And to me, I don't know, maybe this is the wrong thing to say, but I don't think he'd be opposed to it. It doesn't look like he's having the most fun on the planet playing with reduced athleticism and not really finding a role the whole year. I also, like, even with this iteration of the team, he looks like he has even less of a role. At least when they had Durant out there, he could like screen and just like do little things on the floor. And there was that period in November where he actually looked pretty good doing that. Now it's just like he looks really lost out there. And so I would consider doing that. I don't know if they will, if that's something that's something that they've thought about doing, but I don't believe in him. Sharpe, I think you're right. I would consider like bringing, I don't know why Yuta Watanabe isn't playing. Like, at that point, play Yuta or Dorian Finney-Smith at the 5.
Perfect.
Like,
this is exactly what I wanted, because Ben Simmons, to your point, the thing that you would want him to be now is be a guy that can get offensive rebound, be a rebounder, but he hasn't shown the ability to do that. So then you look to Day'Ron Sharpe and you say, Day'Ron, at least you can bang some bodies, eat up some fouls, and help keep Claxton a little bit fresher here. But ultimately, when it comes down to the playoffs, to me, lean into what you have available. That's small ball lineups. Dorian Finney-Smith at the 5. Were you surprised? And it's only been 4 games, but are you surprised that Yuta has completely fallen out of the rotation? Like, if we're trying to set expectations, unless he shows up in tonight's game and starts getting some minutes, it just looks like, hey, after the stars are gone, you don't have a role. I'm a little bit surprised in that, because he's at least a consistent defender in the sense of he has some length. He can close out guys. He does a good job contesting without fouling. We know how good he's been in the corner with the 3 ball. Like, he has enough athleticism to still function offensively. I've been a little bit shocked, like a heavy word, but I'm surprised that like Yuta, who was surprising all year, all of a sudden finds himself buried.
Yeah, I don't get that. I mean, I get it in some sense that like he tailed off a little bit. I mean, he's still shooting the 3 ball well. Some of the 2-point scoring has been kind of not great in the new year, but it's like, if you're looking at Yuta Watanabe for 2-point scoring, like that's probably a flaw in your offense more than anything. I'm surprised. There hasn't been anything glaring in him where it's like, oh, I don't feel like this guy should be in the rotation, versus like, yeah, you could sit there and you could say, well, we need Day'Ron Sharpe out there for a big body and a guy that can grab rebounds. But it's like, okay, but how many defensive miscues are you going to have, because he's not going to know what pick and roll scheme that you're in? Or how many miscues are you going to have offensively where he's unable to, whatever, he's not a huge lob threat, or his hands aren't great and he doesn't get a hand on the ball if a lob is thrown up. It's just kind of like, I feel like there's so much give or take in a way. It's like, you might as well just switch everything. I guess it depends on the matchup that they face in the playoffs, but maybe that's when you're like, all right, we're just going to go with Day'Ron and hope for the best. But if you're not playing like an Embiid, like I would kind of just feel like, all right, we're just going to run this, small ball bench unit and just kind of hope for the best in a way. I mean, really, like with how Ben Simmons has played this year, like I don't feel like him at center is like dramatically different than Dorian Finney-Smith at all, really.
No, again, the deficiencies are going to be the deficiencies. So it's not, it's not like there's this stark contrast about the version of basketball that you play with either one of those players on the court. Obviously, you can say the ball handling offensively for Ben Simmons could be something, but that hasn't looked the same way that it did even at its best pre-trade since they moved on from the superstars. Here's the other thing too, because when I looked at breaking down minutes, so I'd run this down as being, if you're going down from a 10 down to a 9-man rotation, 32 for Dinwiddie, 33 for Johnson and Bridges, and that can be a little bit low, and they're going to play more. Finney-Smith in the 25, Claxton 30 minutes, Thomas for 24, O'Neal and Curry for 22 minutes apiece. At that point, you have 20 minutes left over. That's 8 players. You got 20 minutes left. For the next 24 games, am I going to spend 20 minutes in some version of Day'Ron Sharpe and Ben Simmons or Yuta Watanabe? And then it does beg this other question, because some people responded to this when I made this list and left out Joe Harris. And it's not because he's looked better, actually since the trade, the 3 ball has been there. But if I'm looking at the roster and saying, well, how do we maximize what we have? Joe Harris's defensive liabilities, I guess they have become overall a better defensive team in the trades. But Joe Harris is still it's like you want to mitigate how many guys we're going to put on the court that they say, switch on to him, let's pick on it. And if you're already going to have Curry in this mix, which is fine for some ball handling, and you're already going to have Cam Thomas to some extent, am I wrong in thinking? Because he got down to the teens in terms of minutes over the last couple of games before the All-Star break.
Yeah, I don't know if they're ever. I feel like the Nets could never bench Joe Harris because he's just he is the organization.
And I did put parentheses maybe Joe Harris out of loyalty, because that just does seem like something that they've held on to with him.
Which fine. The problem with them flipping their roster and bringing all these 3-and-D guys is it just puts the spotlight on Joe, because I don't remember him ever being targeted the way he has been the last couple of weeks. And it's every game the other team is all right, we're gonna go find Joe Harris. I don't care who's guarding him. That guy's screening. And it's Jalen Brunson is, torching poor Joe Harris over and over and over. It was Jalen Brunson had 40 because Joe Harris was out there. It single-handedly got him going. Harden was doing the same thing. So it's it's sad. I mean, it's funny because in the beginning of the year, I thought Joe looked pretty okay defensively.
Mm-hmm.
He was staying in front of guys, but it's just there's such a loss in how much ground he can cover now, even from a couple of years ago. So he kind of has to almost play with a cushion on guys. He's kind of backing up against guys. And that's just to avoid getting blown by. But that kind of opens up shots for, stars like Brunson or Harden, who can hit these tough step backs. He just kind of stands no chance right now.
So and then is it comfortable to say we know it's going to be Curry. We know it's going to be Cam Thomas, and Cam Thomas is no stalwart on the defensive end. And again, he's
been better. I stand by he's been a little better.
So here's the interesting thing about Cam Thomas. And Doug and I said, going back to the offseason, when we came into the year, it was, listen, we understand Summer League gets everybody excited, but let's temper expectations, because a lot of guys can do a lot of things there that don't translate to the NBA. And it took a while. What is your perspective on what the Brooklyn Nets are trying to accomplish with him? And it clearly centers around, there's things going on the practice court, in the film room, whatever it may be, that they are trying to build him up to be a guy that they can unleash consistently. But something's holding it back. And Jacque Vuaghn said those 340+ point games, he said it directly. He goes, those are great. By the way, we lost 2 of those, right? So there's no veiled messages being sent here around what they want him to be versus what he is right now in this moment capable of.
A rare Vaughn quote I disagreed with, because I was they had nobody out there. It was Cam Thomas and nobody else. Look, I'm confused by what they're doing. I do think there needs to be, I agree with the idea of wanting to get him to be more of a piece in a team, especially with a team that's this deep. They have so many mouths to feed right now, which is part of the problem with making a 2-for-4 trade, is now you have 4 guys that probably deserve rotation minutes in Dinwiddie, Dorian Finney-Smith, Cam Johnson, and Mikal Bridges. So that's kind of, I understand it from that perspective, but I do think long-term, this is wherever they're going next. And I would be of the mind that you probably are going to eventually settle into some sort of, maybe a retool, maybe, but you're headed to the rebuild, whether they want to get there or not, how fast they want to get there. Cam's the guy you want to build around in a way. I do think there's give or take from you want to make sure he's part of that team ecosystem, but you also don't want to fray the relationship completely where he's just kind of screw this, I'm over this culture team, and them being oh, well, it was great that you had 40, but you only had 2 assists. It's at a certain point, I do think you need to be pretty careful on these sorts of things.
Had 40 though, guys. It's only 2 assists. And some people pointed out too, we had a crossover with the Talking Nets guys, and they were pointing out, it's you can look at some of the stat lines in totality in those non-45 point games when no one else is there to play, where he has 3-4 assists and it's 20+ points. And to your point, listen, we never expected him to be a defensive stopper. We just said be a speed bump. And I actually think he has been a bit more of a speed bump. And most of that, like with a lot of guards in the league, it's just a willingness, right? An attentiveness to try to be in the right spot, try to slow a guy down, and just don't be, because early on, there were times when Cam Thomas was on the court and you could objectively look on the defensive end and say, either Cam doesn't care or he's not actively aware of where he's supposed to be, because there were real lapses on that end of the floor. Do you think that then over these final 24 that they will slowly build towards him being one of the guys they're going to try to help give Mikal Bridges a consistent outlet, along with, I think Dinwiddie has the playoff experience, already had to have him reined in on some of his hero ball attitude when he first got here, which I think was which is hilarious because it gave me all the old school vibes from when he was on the Nets.
I got these horrible, it was like war flashbacks of like the 1920 season, where it was just Spencer Dinwiddie as lead option and Joe Harris was their second option while Kyrie was injured. I was like, oh my God, I forgot how terrible this was.
Well, and let's also, because this is a part of it that we talked about here that I think is funny. Funny, not funny. In only classic Brooklyn Nets, fashion, they make the trade for Kyrie and get Dorian Finney-Smith and Spencer Dinwiddie back. Yeah. And at first you go, that's how you keep giving Kevin Durant some options. Then they go, we're trading Kevin Durant too. Dinwiddie, not his fault. Like, he gave an interview. It was like, yeah, man, be here to facilitate with Kevin Durant, and get out of way of Cam's way when he cooks. Happy to be back with Joe Harris. Like, he was helping to sell the version of the team that never even existed. And now, like, what is the Dorian Finney-Smith, Spencer Dinwiddie? This is a little bit of the short-term, long-term. Because what will we learn over 24 games here to close out this season in terms of how it informs what they do in the off season? Because I think Spencer Dinwiddie, not fully guaranteed $20 million next year. The Finney-Smith contract is nice. It's team friendly. He's 29, going to be 30, but you can like the way he functions. But I don't, is anything going to change what the overall plan is for the Brooklyn Nets going forward? Because to me, and Doug said this, Mikal Bridges was like the key piece. So he's a part of what you're doing going forward. Him and Cam Johnson are attached to the hip. So Cam Johnson gets paid this offseason because you're not going to upset the idea of what you brought back in that big trade.
Yeah.
Beyond him, those two, Claxton, Thomas, is everything else pretty fluid?
Yeah, Clax is a free agent in 2 years, so that's, or maybe a year.
He's got one more, and even
one more.
Even what are the even him, because they've already said remember how much he didn't play over the start of his career, big minutes load. They've reined him back in, and I'm curious about what happens over the final 24 for him as well.
Yep. No, so I think I don't know. It's really interesting. I think the guy, well, obviously you're not going to have Curry back. I would look to move Royce. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm watching this team. That's the guy that I keep being it's really weird that he's still on this team. He made a lot of sense next to Durant and Irving, just with the plays they're able to run. Now he's kind of just there in a way and is a worse version of pretty much everybody they have out there. So yeah, I mean,
isn't that a bummer? Isn't that the bummer of Royce, when you give a first round pick, you go, God, that's steep. But then you see him play around the stars, and you go, okay, I can get there. And then after this, you just said it. It's there's 3 other players that do everything you do slightly better now, which makes you kind of disappointing to watch. It's such a weird evolution of how you feel about players relative to what the team is.
Yeah, it's been pretty hilarious. I'm oh yeah, well, he's still here, still hanging out. That's good. No, I mean, I'm sure they can get something back. I don't know if it would be a first round pick. That's probably pretty steep. But no, I think for them that they can make little moves. They just need to trim down the roster a little bit and just make a little more sense and make it just be a normal functional basketball team with a backup center and little things like that. So it's all good stuff. In a way, I think they can build out a team. The question is what players do they see long term? Dinwiddie's a really interesting one for me. If they keep Dinwiddie into next year, it's okay, this team wants to be really good and try to make the playoffs again. And maybe they're hoping a star asks out, or they're hoping that, I guess, ask out because there's no big free agents coming up or anything like that. So I that would be what it would probably look like if they start trading guys away. It's all right, maybe this is a soft rebuild. They're going to keep Cam and Mikal and Cam Thomas and try to see if they can retool around that. So it'll be interesting. I think we'll learn a lot about what they're doing in this summer, really.
Yeah, and that's kind of, I think, the hard part here in the short term is 24 games. They're saying they want to compete and go to the playoffs. They're trying to find the right version of this team, and that's where it is to me. It's playing Day'Ron right now doesn't make sense if you're saying you want to be competitive going to the playoffs. I want to see Day'Ron develop, but that's a long-term project for that. Having Seth Curry playing says that you do want to make the playoffs and want to be competitive. And then you mentioned when you mentioned Royce O'Neal there, so we saw him in the closing lineup. So when I listed out like the minutes breakdowns there, do you still see it being that he's earmarked for minutes down this stretch here? Like, what's the 10-man rotation coming out, and what refines down to 9? And really in the way of like what makes the most sense to you if they want to be as annoying of a playoff team as possible?
Yeah, I mean, I think you keep the starting lineup as is.
Yep.
Royce O'Neal, I just feel like Joe Harris is going to be a part of it. I mean, I almost feel like I don't know. They want to get to 9. I mean,
do you think Joe is in the 10-man rotation as of right now?
I just like can never see them benching him. I don't know if that's
because they never have. So why would they?
I like him. It's either him or Watanabe, and clearly like Joe has earned the trust of the team. Whether that's correct or not, I don't think it is. But I just think he's going to be in the rotation, even if he's like their lowest minutes guy. Like I just can never see them benching Joe Harris. It's just he's like a part of the team for life. And I feel like now after the team's blown up, they're just gonna be like, yeah, we're gonna have Joe Harris retire at net. It's gonna be great. Like it's like we're in like the glory days of the Nets over the years. I don't know. I think that's probably what you're looking at. I'm dead serious about I think they should really sit Simmons.
Yes.
I just don't get the point anymore. Unless like there is a stretch where he really looks good right before the playoffs. What more do we need to see? We're 50 games in. It's been underwhelming is probably a good place to start. He has not looked right physically. For a guy that is, has dealt with what he's dealt with off the court, just finding himself and trying to find, whatever he's needed in terms of mental health. I can't imagine not playing well and, being under intense criticism, not maybe feeling like himself physically has helped. I just think for all parties involved, like it really might be the best thing to do. And by the way, this team isn't going anywhere. So it's like, what's the harm in a way if you just roll it over and say, hey, let's see where we're at next year.
Yeah, and again, and we'll get out of here on this. We'll stick around for a few minutes. I highlighted a couple of questions or comments coming in from everybody over on YouTube, which we appreciate, man. Thanks for being on a little Friday afternoon live. But I think that's the linchpin to me of having success short and long term. Like, why waste the 24 games right now hoping that Ben Simmons finds something? He hasn't found it to this point. So what is it going to end up doing? Like, it's just like when you look over at the standings and you remember that the Brooklyn Nets are sitting here as the 5 seed, and they're only 2 games up, 3 in the loss column over the Knicks and 3 games over top of the Heat. And, I don't know what's going to happen now with the Atlanta Hawks as they try to hire their new head coach and do it on the fly down the stretch of the season, as all great NBA teams do.
Second time they've done this, by the way. They've done this before twice now. They did this with McMillan. It's just their thing. It's like the Nets blowing up their roster at the trade deadline. The Hawks are like, we're just going to get a new coach with like 20 games to go.
Yeah, we're not going to go the whole roster thing. We'll bring in a new coach. Yeah, but, it's like you have these things behind you. So it's like, Ben Simmons, seeing if Ben Simmons figures it out can cost you 3 games down the stretch and can cost you X in the standings. And maybe that ultimately doesn't matter in the big picture. But I just think if you're trying to figure out, like, the offseason is when you figure out Ben Simmons. The offseason is when you see if he's fully healthy and gets practices and playing time with Bridges and see how they gel. But I think after the trade of the superstars, I do want the other version of this thing. It's Mikal Bridges, it's Cam Johnson, it's Dorian Finney-Smith, it's Spencer Dinwiddie, it's Claxton. I prefer to see Yuta. Because, you know what? I'll learn more about Yuta over 24 games without having 2 superstars and what he can be for this team going forward. And then what it's going to mean for Cam Thomas, et cetera. So all of this to say, I don't know what's going to happen. I do believe, let's close out on this, because Doug and I asked each other this the other day. Does this team, do they make the playoffs?
Yeah.
Are they above the play-in?
Oh, that I don't know. Boy. I think they play around 500.
Yeah.
And there's only 2.5 games.
It's a fine line.
I think they fall into the play-in is probably my guess.
If they fall into the play-in, do they get out of the play-in?
They would play Atlanta and Toronto. Toronto slightly a little pesky lately. They've been kind of a classic Toronto thing to do is just pull it together right when everybody's out on them. They're like, nope, we got one more little run in us. Yeah. Gosh, I don't know. I think probably not. I think they'd
Okay.
lose in the play, and then the second they'd be at probably the tops, one of the top 2 seeds. After that, I don't know who they play. They play maybe one of Washington, Toronto. I I don't know. It's like
It's fascinating. Well,
I think they're the team I believe in the least of the top 10 because well maybe other than Atlanta and Washington. So, but I mean, those teams have like legit guys on there, and we'll see what the Nets look like. We've seen what their fourth quarters look like in certain games. It can look the ball can look a little lost sometimes. So, yeah, it'll be fun though. It'll be fun.
it isn't the ultimate thing. It's like there's 24 games. So if you go
Yeah.
from where you are now to the 10th seed, well, I won't have the highest level of confidence.
Yeah,
If you
yeah.
battle and you fight around and what other teams are doing, like you can feel differently about it. So
Sure.
it's nothing to hold Matt Brooks to. We won't blast this out on Twitter as a definitive statement, but it will be interesting to watch. Obviously, Matt, at Matt Brooks NBA over on Twitter, Nets Daily columnist, the Clear Out podcast. Anything else? I know you're working on all these video breakdowns, but beyond anything beyond those that you want people to know about?
Expect me to do something general NBA content. That's my weekend assignment that I've set out for myself. I want to go get into the playoffs. I always like to, I think the Nets playoff run is going to be pretty short. It's hard to be a downer here, but so I will be switching over and doing a lot of general NBA stuff, be writing about playoff teams. I'd like to do a couple non-playoff teams before we get into the playoffs, some random teams. It'll be fun. So that's kind of what I'm looking at. So stay tuned for that. If it goes well, if I do this correctly, I'll have some sort of announcement about it this week. That's so, root for me, all right?
Follow Matt everywhere that you get him for that thing that is coming. Just at a time.
Yeah.
We'll office line. At a time, TBD, we will be launching some really good content. We wrap up the episode and let you know over on YouTube, over on social media. Follow myself at Adam Armbrecht, at Doug Norrie, at Locked On Nets. You know the deal. Wrap it up here, and then we'll stick around just a couple of minutes, hit a couple of these questions from you, the fans, and we'll get out the door on a Friday afternoon. That marks right there, the official. That was the end of the podcast, and then this is the other thing that
this is where we party, right?
Yeah, this is where we cut loose. Yeah, this is where the profanity, latent tirades just really come out here. People start realizing I have just a serpent's tongue when it comes to this stuff.
A bottle with a sparkler come in. It's gonna be we're partying. This is the fun part.
So I highlighted just a couple here from everybody over on the comments. You can continue to throw them in here, but I think we'll just do a couple of these real quick because there was some interesting ones. Here. Well, this I'll start with a classic. Can we still get This was one. This was Doug and I just rolling this rock up the hill towards the deadline. Superstars don't know what's gonna happen, and it was like trade for Mo Bamba, maybe Naz Reid, but every once in a while, why not a little bit Dwight Howard? So
I'm a sicko, and I wanted Hassan Whiteside. Like legitimately thought Hassan Whiteside could be okay. He was not bad on Utah last year. I stand by it.
There we go. Well, listen, that's better than saying, can we still get Dwight Howard? So we also, Matt, I've realized that the team does the opposite of what your last podcast is. Last one was, are the Nets the best team blown up? Before that, Nets are disappointing, 12-game win streak.
Yeah, that tells you how many podcasts I'm doing. I've been a little, we're slowing down a little bit this year. Clear Out is in under construction right now. I think that's probably the best way to put it.
Like the old memes, like the internet meme, where it's just the guy with the hammer, trying to figure it out. Well, guess what? At the start of the off season, before we came into the season, Doug, we said, hey, what's going to happen with this team? What do we think ultimately happens? Doug said, they'll probably stay together. They'll compete. They'll be in the playoffs. I said, I think they blow it up. But then it only took getting into the year, the winning streak, the month of December, where I was like, baby, I'm back in. Stability all around. Like, this team's never gonna, and then they blew it up. So
they were the best team in the league. I stand by it. Like, and if, by the way, if they'd kept it together, and like, I mean, I know, crazy idea to go 18-12 and want to keep the team together. Just a wild idea all around. If they'd kept it together and they'd gotten Durant back, like I think with how the NBA looks right now, there's so much talk about parity and nobody standing above the other. I legitimately believe that this team, if they'd gotten a backup center at the deadline, would be like the favorite right now. It sucks.
I know. It was, that, like, we spent so much time about, like, could Naz Reid, like, be a nice needle mover for the Brooklyn Nets? And then just that never mattered at all. This one I think is overall interesting for this run here. Why would Seth play a single minute coming in from Faro for this team? Cam has a higher assist percentage and a lower turnover percentage than Seth. Cam and Sumner worked quite well together. I need the rim pressure. Are you that's a guy we didn't bring up in the podcast, but like I don't know why Seth is on the team. That's really my first question. I don't know why he's still here.
Same.
But yeah, and I guess it's like why is he still here? Okay, he's still here. And why is Sumner a guy who like played pretty well when the stars were out and can put pressure to the point of Farrah there, can put pressure on the rim, can do some things offensively, has some nice defensive length. It was like, no, you're also buried. Like he falls into the bucket with Yuta of going like, not even worth a look. Like not even worth a look.
Yeah, I agree. Sumner's a little wild for me. Like he looks good. He's like the ultimate boomer bust guy, but like in a role player mode.
That was Doug was always like, this dude plays like too fast for basketball.
Yeah,
like,
it's crazy.
Yeah, it's good.
It's wild. You're gonna get something good, whether it's a highlight or a low light. Something good is happening when he pushes the break. You know it every time. Yeah, that's a fair point. Only thing I will say probably is that you're gonna get a little bit more from Seth in terms of movement shooting. It gives you a little bit more. Like Cam is kind of like a standstill. He's going to be stashed in the corner, and he's gotten better at that to his credit. Slower release, kind of know what you're getting. Seth's going to move around, make the defense shift. So that's the only case I can make. And I guess the Nets right now, they don't really have anybody like that because Joe Harris is not moving as well this year. So, prime Joe Harris, hell yeah. Like you don't need Seth and prime Joe Harris out there, but the version of Joe Harris that we have versus Seth, I do think you're getting a little bit more. Now, I can also make the case they don't run enough, movement sets for somebody like Seth. They just don't do as much as they probably could for him. So I even then, I'm like, I don't even know if this is like the best possible version of, what an offense can look like for Seth.
Well, that's what's weird about it too, because I will say like the backcourt functionality, if it's going to be like dependent on screen setting and and ball movement, like there are going to be times like this is where I make the excuse for, and someone of the last two that we had here was saying like I'm the biggest Cam Thomas fan, but he should not play point guard, which like I agree with, but like the problem is when he gets into hero ball, you go like you can't get into hero ball, but if the team doesn't have necessarily the right pieces to create some space and opportunities for the point guards to make the right quote unquote basketball play, like I do think it defaults to that. And it's different versions. It's Spencer Dinwiddie is closer to Seth Curry in terms of being on ball, a little bit of creativity, and then getting a shot off for himself. Cam Thomas just seems to be more like I'll eat this clock up and then I'll jack one up from wherever I am. And certainly has the highest upside of attacking downhill, getting to the line. Like that's the kind of stuff that I do think about. Like there's value in being able to draw fouls and get to the line because you don't have bigs, Claxton, Day'Ron, Simmons to be able to like put pressure in that way at the basket.
It's really a shame they never quite figured out how to use Cam as like a second side guy. So like they'd have Durant run pick and roll on one side and he'd kick to Cam and Cam would just like, either hit the catch and shoot or drive and get to the rim because like that always made sense for me. They've just, and a lot of that I think is why maybe the team has been a little tepid with the way they've been using him and what they've kind of just thrown out there with him. So, right now it feels like the only thing they can really do is have one of the big set of screen for him. And to his credit, he'll kind of guide his defender into the screen. He'll use a bunch of moves, get the guy on his back, and then get into a mid-range shot. Like he's a great scorer, but it's like you're kind of running the same thing over and over and over because you're not really going to get a ton from him as a passer. And that's kind of your offense is pretty. You know what you're getting when Cam Thomas is the point guard. You know where you're going with it.
And I think like it's like, and that is something that it doesn't matter now, but there's a part of me that was like, he shouldn't be getting more shots or getting, high volume of shots when you have Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. But in the old developing the best version of the roster, you wouldn't have hated a version where he was first of all, from a team perspective, from a coaching perspective, first give him the minutes. Yeah. And then second is like, give him opportunities to be the beneficiary of the gravity of KD and of Kyrie Irving. And maybe that is to the detriment now because now you haven't put those mechanisms in place for him to rely on, especially after losing those stars.
Yeah. It's, I don't know. I think they're being too cautious with his development. It's like, what where are we going with this team anyways? Like, why not? I don't know. I mean, I think you can go too far with that, but
I have one last question before we get the door, but what's good, Adam and Matt? That's good. From Henry Hall, we still need a big, a wing, and a point guard. I'll settle for another big with our remaining roster spot. The only I highlight that just to say, like, are you surprised? Like Vaughn said, yeah, it's on our list, but like it's not top priority. I'm not worried about it. Is that really just a product of again, like who's really out there? And if you brought him in, we've already got 4 new bodies. We're trying to figure all this stuff out. Do we want to introduce now another guy, as much as it is about trying to show some confidence in Day'Ron of like, hey, like you're one of our guys. We drafted you. Like you can get there. We're not going to bring someone ahead of him. Because even before the trades, Mark said that like, well, we do have Day'Ron. We want to see what he can do here before we worry about making a move.
I think it's a concession to the fact that they have too many players right now. So if you add one more guy in, you're just like, that complicates a very loaded, 12, 11 players that can play. That becomes 12 at that point. Right. It really, I mean, I think we can all be realistic here about this team. And maybe that's what they're doing, is just being like, look, like, let's just see what we got in these final 24 games. We're going to see who looks good. It's kind of how we actually, it's funny enough, like, I remember the 2019-2020 season. Oh, I just got chills again talking about it. What we called it the whole year was like the audition season, which is just the darkest thing ever. Is that it's like we're watching 82 games of being like, is this guy good enough to play with Kevin Durant? Or no, I don't know. So
no, we like you. We like
you. You can stay. You know what, David Nwaba, you can stay. And but yeah, like. That's kind of what I felt like that season was. And this is, I think, in a way, a version of that, but it's not like, okay, which guys are going to fit around stars. It's more like, all right, who's going to be here in the next year or two? I think that's kind of, and then you can figure out who you want to add from there.
My last one, which I should have put in the podcast, is from me though. Does Claxton over the final 24, does the chemistry developing with Bridges and these new guys, like, because I expected it to be between minutes and the workload and these new players. Like I knew that his game was going to suffer in terms of playing off of Kevin Durant. And that was such a nice tandem over the course of this season. Can you see, we even saw a little glimpse of it in that last game, like him and Mikal, like starting to get a little bit of chemistry there. Or does that excite you? But like, is that something you're going to watch for, is like, how does Claxton play with these other guys? Because as excited as we were about him over the course of this year, there could be a real 24-game dose of reality to what Nicholas Claxton is going forward.
I mean, I think the one that I look at honestly is with Spencer. Just that lob chemistry. I think that's the thing. Like we know, for those who've been watching the Nets for a while, we know that it takes Spencer a little bit to build that chemistry with his big men. I think we can think back to how long it took for him and DeAndre Jordan to connect on a lob in whatever season that was. It's like 15
one of the
games.
Ugliest things to see DeAndre Jordan, who only has one function, jump up and the ball just be like, you know what?
Sail above his head.
And
then when he's like,
no, we're good.
Hold on. I probably shouldn't have watched Lob City highlights of this guy before this game, because this is not working out. I think that's going to be the big thing. The guards are going to need to learn like how and when Nick rolls versus when he slips. They're going to need to learn like where he rolls to, how high they can place it. So I think like that type of stuff is the big thing. And otherwise, like, that's Nick is kind of what he is offensively. Defensively, I think he's going to fit great. Seems like defensively they have their identity for the most part. The biggest thing for them will just be, can they improve their offense to a degree where they're getting good shots and actually making shots? Because if they aren't, and you're missing shots, that's going to lead to transition opportunities for the other team. And your defense can be as good as it is in the half court, but if that's happening a bunch and teams are getting points off your misses, like there's only so much you can do.
Yeah, that's the old, great defense is as good as your offense can at least consistently play, right? There has to be a floor on the offensive end. Otherwise, you get some hard spots. All right.
Yep.
That'll do it for us. We will though, over like the back end of the season, the off season, we'll have Matt back on because there'll be a lot of things to talk about, whether from a Nets perspective or also just from an NBA wide narrative. Because there are going to be, I always think about this when it comes to NFL stuff. There's a lot of players you could be watching in the playoffs that could be available, that may be targets for Brooklyn. So we'll do a lot of that good stuff, man. Follow him all over the great places that you can find him and us. And we'll be back again next time talking all things Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Hell yeah. Fun as always.
Oh, yeah. You can compliment us. It's all good.